Tom and I discovered Joe Bob Briggs in the early mid-90s, I think.
Right.
And it was funny, we lived in a really small town, and the closest movie theater was almost an hour away.
Yeah.
It was a shithole, too.
Yeah, it wasn't good.
But we discovered things like Mystery Science Theater, and there was a decent video store that had a lot of, like, really bizarre, kind of exploitation movies, like in a back room somewhere.
Yeah.
But obviously those things combined with Joe Bob Briggs, the show on TCM, I mean, that was how we learned everything that we talk about in the podcast today.
My name's Jeffrey Ford. This is
Matt Madison.
And we currently run the Mondo Company Limited YouTube channel. And
Go take a look at it.
And I also have a WordPress blog under
Shameless plug.
Yep. So anyway, we'll just jump right into the questions about Joe Bob Briggs' return, the last drive-in, and what we think about it and what we hope for the next one. So
for a sec, I thought you said The Last Dragon. I'm like, I really hope he does that one.
Yeah.
Well, now I just hope he does that one in general.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chris Prevost, and I'm a writer for PopHorror.com. I'm based out of Montreal, Canada. And let's see, the first time that I was ever exposed to Joe Bob Briggs. When I was a kid, we traveled to the U.S. a lot, since we lived pretty close to the U.S. border. And this time we went, the family and I went to Maine, Old Orchard Beach. And this time we rented a huge house. And in this house was an even huger TV. It was one of these big old projection screen TVs. And as soon as I saw that, like, my jaw hit the floor, and I was like, oh my god. As soon as everybody goes to bed, I'm grabbing some Count Chocula cereal, I'm making my way back downstairs, and I'm going to watch awesome American programming, like real deal, good old American cable TV, which we didn't have here, all night long.
I would catch Joe Bob Briggs here and there, like, very often. Like, I got to see the episode he did on Troll. I think he did an episode on the first Troll movie.
Oh, nice.
There was The Beast Within, which I almost caught, like, after a basketball game, but then I kind of pussed out because, I don't know, like...
Because Scary Katie did?
Well, yeah, the thing is, I didn't even know how adult that... I was probably, like, 7 or 8 at the time.
Okay, yeah,
so,
that... Fair enough.
Again, I know they would have edited out the stuff, but still, like...
But at the same time, oh my god, that guy's turning into a bug!
Then...
And it gets weirder.
Well,
made my way downstairs, grabbed my Count Chocula cereal, plopped myself in front of the TV, and fired up that huge monster of a TV. And first thing that was on was TNT and Monster Vision, and I had never seen anything like that before. As soon as I saw that, I was like, what is going on? Because at the time, there was no internet, so there was no way of kind of realizing, connecting with other fans, or realizing actually that there was a community like this. I was just at the beginning of, like, discovering horror. I had a buddy of mine that lived across the street named Brian, and he also had this intense love of horror, like I did. But besides that, we didn't know anybody else really that had such a huge passion for the genre. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, you could do this as a job? Like, Joe Bob was there in all of his glory, and I was freaking out. I was like, oh my god, like the drive-in totals and everything. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before.
Well, I know he was on the movie channel, but I think I first caught him on TNT doing the Monster Vision show, probably about maybe 1996, I think. And I would have just been in my second year doing Svengoolie with our company here locally in Chicago, after my earlier tenure as son of Svengoolie back in the 80s at a different channel. And I was just walking through the channels looking for something to watch and hit upon a movie. And of course, you know, it was a horror movie. I was hooked right away. I honestly don't remember which movie it was, but then I saw Joe Bob doing one of his breaks, and I thought it was really entertaining, and I would just kind of tune in whenever I could after that.
I first discovered Joe Bob Briggs at a very opportune time in my life because as a child of the 60s and 70s who loved the drive-in from birth, and for all I know, I was born there, The two drive-ins we had both kind of closed. I think we ended up with a Home Depot, and I forget what the other one became. But anyway, drive-ins are closing, mid-'80s. Along comes Joe Bob. So I'm sitting there thinking, none of my friends gets this, which is okay. I've never really felt the need to apologize for my love for horror or the drive-in, because it's always just been part of who I am, and I'm not going to apologize for who I am to anybody. Joe Bob gets that. He not only gets that, he celebrates it. And there weren't a whole lot of places to celebrate these kind of movies back in the early 80s. We had Famous Monsters. Of course, we had Fangoria, which had come out in 79. Famous Monsters might have even been gone by then. So we had magazines and we had a few books, but we had a living, breathing Joe Bob Briggs on the movie channel to guide us with his light. And we mutants felt like we had a place to go, and it was so damn entertaining because he's a funny guy, let's face it.
Yeah. Well, there's so much nostalgia now for 1980s horror, and the 1980s is really when he first made his mark, because that was the era of so many drive-in movies. You know, it was the post-Halloween horror boom, you had the post-Porky's teen sex comedies, you had the Chuck Norris films. I mean, the 80s were a huge, huge decade for drive-in cinema. So, you know, he's kind of like a figurehead of the 80s, and now that the 80s are this major nostalgia craze, he's kind of right at the forefront of all that and still going strong.
He made horror relatable. He made it accessible. He made it acceptable. Here's a guy sitting on set in what appeared to be a living room, talking to you in a really folksy manner, very humorous, the kind of guy you'd like sitting on the couch next to you discussing all of these cheesy movies. And the fact that he took horror and he elevated it. He took it from the basement during the 70s and 80s, and the 80s, in my estimation, were the golden era, but he took it out of that stigma of being like one rung under porn. And that was good. He made it so that he brought these little gems of movies into the spotlight that Siskel and Ebert weren't going to talk about. So for people that grew up loving horror like myself, in the 70s we had Dr. Shock out of Philadelphia. But Joe Bob was different. He wasn't a character. He didn't have makeup. There was no shtick. He had the body counts and the breast counts and, the male girl. He had characters. He was like the Mr. Rogers of horror, if you will.
Well, I think part of it is, again, the fact that the character he's playing is unique. And I know some people have actually tried to do similar things, but not as successfully as Joe Bob. And just the fact that he has a great sense of humor and perspective on the films and shows that he does appreciate them no matter what their quality is. He's not doing lame put-downs of them. And especially he does his homework, which is something I always feel is important when you're hosting a show like this. I know others have been influenced by him in various ways, not only by his performance, but his writing in various media. And I think that the reaction at his return definitely shows that he's earned a real place in pop culture.
So I've known Joe Bob Briggs a long time. We've featured him in the magazine. We've reviewed his books. He was a great guest at some of the Fangoria conventions over the years. And what I love about Joe Bob is he has such a unique voice. He has such a unique presence. And he's been a welcome fixture in the exploitation field for many, many years. And I enjoy everything he says and everything he writes, and being at his lectures is always a treat.
What Joe Bob did for horror is he legitimized it in a way. He took the template of a horror host, and previously horror hosts were sort of campy and jokey and derisive of the material, and Joe Bob legitimized it with a scholarly wealth of knowledge about those films. You would show up for these movies and you would learn a lot in those little interstitials where he would talk about the films, talk about the stories behind making them, and talking about why they were special. You were entertained endlessly, but you were also educated. And Joe Bob educated, I think, maybe more than one generation of filmgoers.
I just got to say, Joe Bob, I don't know him personally, but he's in my world because it was always so thrilling when he paid attention to the work that I was doing. So I'm excited to know that Joe Bob is getting his own limelight for a change. okay. I love Bad Sam.
I think people underestimate Joe Bob's influence on horror culture in general because he was one of the champions of some of the worst films ever made, and he had staying power, and he had charisma, and he had presence, and Joe Bob should really get a trophy for this. In fact, since we just started doing Splatterpunk trophies, maybe we should give one of those to Joe Bob. Hold that thought.
I will say I own every single Joe Bob Briggs book ever written, I'm pretty sure. Yep. And we recently just used Profoundly Disturbing. I talked about the golden age of porn and used Deep Throat as the basis, the chapter on Deep Throat.
Yeah, I used it for my Blaxploitation episode and Shaft
the chapter on Shaft. Yeah, so we frequently use him as reference.
Here's like this one's the classic one. Like all of his early like drive-in reviews were for, especially some he later covered in. He covered as part of the last drive-in. There's a little blurb for Rabid. In this one, the sequel book, Joe Bob goes back to the drive-in, and of course he's got interviews for Hell Comes to Frogland, the Bride of Frankenstein remake, Godzilla '85, Mad Max. So, yeah, also introduction by Wayne Newton. How many books have an introduction by Wayne Newton?
We were just finishing up season 5 of the podcast when I think I heard about it through Joe Bob Briggs' Twitter. I honestly thought it was a joke because it was like Friday the 13th and they were like 24-hour live stream of Joe Bob Briggs on Shudder, and I was like, this can't be real. Like, this isn't... Joe Bob Briggs is not still doing this anymore.
Right.
But we didn't have Shudder, so...
Yeah, because we're cheap.
Yeah.
But then I heard the server broke down anyway, so I guess we would have missed it regardless.
Yeah.
But then we found out that they were doing Sleepaway
Camp!
So we were like, fuck it, we gather up $50 and
$20 a person,
yeah.
And we now are proud owners of Shudder membership.
Yep.
So
thanks, Joe Bob.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
Holy shit! You mean Joe Bob's coming back? Well, this is the greatest news I've ever heard. So, trying to explain it to my wife, she didn't quite get it, and I was like, no, you got to check these out with me. And seeing her face at the end of episode 13, when the lights dim. And Joe Bob's sitting there after saying, this is it. This is the last drive-in. This is the last ever. Not doing this again. I thought she was going to cry. It was one of the saddest things I've ever been a part of. And then, then the Twitter announcement hits like, oh, he's coming back. And he's coming back for all the fans.
I heard about it from you. And I think we both had the same reaction, which we were talking about earlier, which was, oh my God, my Lord and Savior, Joe Bob is back! Fair for you too?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on.
We're both super glad Joe Bob Briggs is back. Obviously, we grew up with him, so it's like having a visit from an old friend that you thought was, dead.
Dead, yep.
But the main thing is the new audience that gets to experience it now. So not just Joe Bob Briggs, but the movies. When we were looking online, it was like all these people were like, oh my God, this crazy new movie, Basket Case. And I was like, wait a minute, you've never seen Basket Case?
You've never seen it? How's that?
So it's not just Joe Bob Briggs, but it's bringing all of these movies to people that normally wouldn't have ever seen them before. And,
Yeah, and he's bringing mainstream stuff back too, like Hellraiser, Reanimator, also great movies. But then, he's not forgetting the deep cuts like Tourist Trap and, of course, The Legend of Boggy Creek. So that's amazing.
Personal favorite.
Yeah, and a whole new audience gets to experience that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Hi, this is Mick Garris, and I just want to give all of my great congratulations to a wonderful career to my friend John Bloom, Joe Bob Briggs, the most amazing dweller in the cellar of drive-in magic. And I just have so much appreciation for everything he's done and is doing for our genre, the gutter genre, for we the people.
So we both love drive-in culture, grindhouse movies, grindhouse theaters, but they're dying arts, so there's not a lot of people out there trying to preserve it. You've got examples like the Rialto Report podcast, and then, of course, Joe Bob Briggs.
Yeah, as a longtime resident of New York, Times Square sucks balls now. I remember vaguely from the early 90s, a couple of the struggling theaters still being open, like the Lyric or I think Cinerama, but, it's a really important part of not just film culture and history, but a part of American culture too, just because it was just such a movement, such an American thing that really only existed for a short period of time. And it's important. It's important for all of us to remember. So we love it. We love what Joe Bob Briggs is doing. So happy that he's back and bringing these movies to a new audience, and everyone gets to experience the magic that is Joe Bob Briggs.
Yeah, thanks, Joe Bob.
Okay, recording with Joe Lansdale in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Joe Bob Briggs, The Siren of the Drive-In by Joe R. Lansdale. It was a siren call to the dollar a carload generation, and it was in black and white. It was published in what Joe Bob Briggs called the Dallas Boring News. It was his column, Joe Bob Goes to the Drive-In, and it was wonderful. Drive-ins were already struggling on their last legs, as it were, or turned into outdoor porno movies with bright lights turned out to the highway to keep unsuspecting children and grandmas from being shocked into oblivion by bobbing butts and exposed sex organs. Damn those lights. Joe Bob, bless his little heart, was not only reporting on drive-in movies, he was causing the interest in drive-ins to swell. But like the hopes of a teenage boy, certain swellings were not always rewarded, and in time unceremoniously deflated. And like the drive-in, did not continue to stand tall. Technology whipped the drive-ins, but videos and cable, and finally even more advanced devices gave it the elbow drop and the step-over toe hold, and finally, death. What will go next? Apple pie? But oh, Joe Bob, you wonderful rascal. You reviewed movies no one else would touch, oozing, howling, bleeding extravaganzas made with hope and a prayer, cheap effects, and someone's credit card, or possibly coinage gained from pawning grandma's silver. These were the movies a generation of drive-in goers like myself and those who wish they had been wanted to know about. We wanted to know who starred in them, who made them, and why. How did they get that thing in basket case to give such a good performance? Was the tossed penis in street trash hard to catch? Is changing into a giant bug painful so that you might become the beast within? Only you had the answers, Joe Bob. While others spent numerous hours and columns on indoor movies of quality, you showed us the corn kernels in the dung piles. And sometimes you just showed us the dung piles. But someone needed to do it. Someone knowledgeable and from Texas had to do it. And you were that person. Thank the stars and all that is holy. You were there for that bright, shining moment and are there still with a show that glorifies and simultaneously insults, jump scares, blood-splattered nudity, and the just plain wrong. And even if it's metaphorical, long may your popcorn bag be filled. Long may your drink cup flow over. And long may your teeth resist the cavity-inducing effects of cheap concession stand candy. Stay out of those restrooms if you can, Joe Bob. The floors are sticky, and the formerly white mints in the urinals have turned yellow as the eyes of a humanoid from the deep. The knife carved and written on toilet stalls with all their greatly revealed wisdom about life and sex and Betty Sue's phone number have toilets that won't flush and a serial killer hiding in there. Sit high in your Cadillac convertible as the glow from the drive-in screen soaks your face in holy radiance. And the movies roll on, and we will revere you.